graduate of Michigan State University. He developed 3 national programs dealing with youth, women, and returning veterans. He has appeared on ABC, NBC, and CBS National News, The Today Show, Our Magazine, National PM Magazine, Charles Perrault Morning Show, and Oprah Winfrey. He has been...
He made it with that one.
He has, I should have said this stuff. He has been featured in Newsweek, USA Today, Business Week, the Chicago Sun-Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Detroit Free Press, and Detroit News. He has been the subject of a half-hour documentary show nationwide in Japan in March of 1984. Jim believes in balance in life, and so has done such diverse things as being a circus clown, rodeo rider, symphony musician, cake decorator, and parade enthusiast. He spent part of the summer of 1985 working as a family relief worker in Ethiopia. He spent part of the summer of 1983 as a roadie with the rock group Journey. He passed a milestone of speaking to more than 1 million students worldwide. Will you please help me welcome Jim Booth?
This kind of lengthy introduction is a little misleading, and I have to share this with you. I was also a 7-letter athlete in high school. Was president of my class 3 years running. I carried an A- average, and I also tried to kill myself 3 times. 3 times I tried to kill myself. Because you see, I was living off the image. I was so afraid if something happened on that football field, if I didn't perform, then I really wasn't worthy, and therefore there would be no one there for me. And I spent most of my life living in a family where love was based on performance. And I would have given anything in my life to have been able to release myself from that. But I couldn't. When I was 15 years old on March 12th, I wanted out. I was crying out inside, and no one was willing to listen. Everybody kept saying, "Jim, you're doing great." My family kept saying, "Jim, we're so proud of you. Look at the accomplishments that you've done." My friends kept, surrounding me with praise, when inside I was just screaming out. And I didn't want to live anymore. I was walking out of school it was spring track practice. And I was walking out of school, and one of the custodial staff, who I knew personally, who used to just laugh and joke and tease with me, looked at me that day and said, "Jim, there is something wrong. There is something wrong." And I said, the way I said to everybody else in my life, "It's okay. Everything's great. Now, just a little bit of a down moment. Don't worry about it." Well, this guy sensed, he had just a wonderful presence with kids, and he sensed that there was something that was happening. And he called my best friend, Ricky Myers, to tell him. And Ricky and he both collectively kind of talked it out and came to the conclusion that there was some things that I wasn't sharing with either one of them or the rest of the world. That night, at about midnight, I got a call from Ricky Myers saying, "Jim, I'm aware that something is wrong. Don't do anything that you'll regret. I really love you." That call that night saved my life. But that call originated by a sensitive individual who saw that there was something more going on, who saw that it just wasn't all that it seemed to be on the outside. And that combination saved my life. Now, it's it's an interesting, there's an irony to this whole thing. Because the custodian, who I virtually credit along with Ricky Myers of saving my life, 6 months later died of a heart attack. And I was sitting in the pews listening to the eulogies of this man, which were many. And I thought to myself, this man took care of all of us. Why didn't he spend as much time taking care of himself? And that's the balance. That's the balance. All of you in this room, as well as myself, we all came into this with a certain commitment level. Well, I have to tell you, sometimes if we run dry, there is nothing that we can give to these kids. Nothing. I did a school in New York last spring. A teacher got up tearfully in front of the whole school. And she was an English teacher. She had given her class an assignment to compare themselves to an inanimate object. And the kid who was the most popular kid in school handed in this paper. Now, there's a little bit more history to this. The teacher was going through her own painful divorce, got to school that day with pretty much 1 foot in school and 1 foot back in her own problems. When this paper was handed to her, she more or less kind of glossed over it a little bit. Didn't listen very closely. The boy wrote this. When asked to compare themselves to an inanimate object, he compared himself to a rubber band. He said, I am a rubber band. People pull at me, twist me, stretch me thin. I've been trying to bounce back as a rubber band should. I have many times, but it's getting harder and harder, and I'm getting thin and worn. People keep pulling at me, twisting and stretching me. And I feel tighter and tighter. I know when I break, people will feel sorry because they can't use me anymore. But they stretch me, and I feel thin and worn. Then I'll break, but it'll be too late. May I ask any of you in this room, if you got a paper like this, what would be instinctively the first reaction? First of all, given the history I just gave you, this is the most popular kid in school, surrounded by tons of friends, seems to have, the image of having it all together. What would be your first instinct? Anyone? Yes?
That's a cry for help, that he's on the edge, he could be on the edge of a nervous breakdown or on the edge of a suicide, and that he's crying out for someone to help.
Okay. Anyone else? Good point. Anyone else? Would that be more or less a universal concept for all of you? Okay? What would you do in this particular case, if this boy handed in this? Let's assume that I'm this boy and you virtually are, you're the person that I've just given this paper to. Just do role play with me a little bit.
Okay, well, I guess I would try and get closer to you and find out.
Why don't you just do it instead of just theorizing it? Just do it and work with me. And
All right, what's your name?
Jim.
Jim?
Yes.
Jim, from what you wrote, I get the feeling that that you're really stressed out at this point, or that there's like a major problem that you're having. And could you maybe tell me a little bit about it, or could you talk to me about it?
There's nothing going on. I just had a down moment.
Well, why do you feel like you're so stretched out? And
Oh, I was just feeling a little bit sad today.
well, are your friends demanding too much of you, or
No, they're okay.
are your parents expecting a lot from you?
But they always do. It's okay.
Well, how do you release some of this, the tension, or which it seems like you're building something up inside here. How do you get rid of it?
I'm not building anything inside. Please don't read into any of the things I wrote.
Do you have any close friends that you can talk to?
love sports, so I play sports all the time.
But when you're really tired or burned out from sports, what else do you have to go to?
I have fun.
Okay, what kind of fun do you have?
Oh, I like going out with, I like going out with a bunch of guys.
Do you,
Can we hold it for a second?
Sure.
Because I'm letting you,
okay.
kind of dig your own grave on this.
Gee, thanks.
Are we getting anywhere with this line? And this is fairly typical. I mean, I speak to 150,000, kids a year, and I listen to this all the time. Can anybody else help me that what you would suppose we could use as an alternative tact on this? Anyone else? Do some role play with me. I want you to kind of get into character on this.
I know that at our district, we have a crisis intervention group, so if you thought a student was in trouble, you certainly would ask for outside help. But I guess the thing that would be appealing would be to work with the ones who I would think are most influential with you, I guess, is to sit down and the people I think who influence you the most and discuss it with them and find out if there was a way for them to intervene and assist you.
Okay, can you just
Seems to be
more or
the
less
key.
work with me, though, in this context? Because I have to tell you that sometimes the time element between when this is written and when something occurs is very short. And sometimes, gathering the people together and doing a lot of what would be the normal process things, sometimes doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I'd like you to do some interaction with me, if you choose, or, whatever.
She can assist you too.
Yeah, you guys work
We're
together.
now a team. This is the crisis.
Wonderful, good.
But I guess I would start out by asking you who your friends were, who probably you considered to
Just
be.
ask away. Go ahead.
Jim, I haven't had you very long in class, and I see you hanging out with some of the kids in the school here. Who is one of your favorite friends that you normally go to games with and associate with here at school?
Ricky Myers is my best friend.
And Ricky Myers, do you and Ricky Myers discuss a lot of things? I mean, you discuss.
Oh,
things
yeah, we
about
discuss a
school,
lot of stuff.
School and girls.
Yeah, we
and
do a lot of
guys,
things.
All those things together.
Mm-hmm.
Does Ricky tell you most of the things?
I think I have to tell you that I think we have, a really close relationship. I feel safe with Ricky.
That's good. It's nice to feel safe with somebody, and then you're comfortable usually talking.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think something, Jim, for me is, I don't know if you're really being truthful with me since you don't know me very well. I'm not so sure we have a trust relationship where you'll want to say things to me, but the writing you've given to me indicates a deep concern that I have, and I'm going to tell you ahead of time, I would like to discuss it too with Ricky, if you didn't mind.
I have to tell you, I've never seen you be concerned about me. I don't know, sometimes you say that, but I've never seen you be concerned about me.
Yeah, Jim, I think sometimes in the teaching profession it turns out that way until something triggers something with so many kids. It's just the way it is. I wished it was otherwise, but sometimes it turns that way. But from what you've written here, and I have a deep concern, and I can't just excuse it. I feel that I have to take some action about this.
Well, please don't. I just wrote this. It was just creative. I didn't mean to do it.
I think, Jim, it's a really good paper, and you've done a good job all the way along. Is it something that Jim would understand?
Ricky.
Would understand. Would he be concerned? Does he sometimes understand when you're upset without you even telling him?
Yeah, sometimes. But, he writes this stuff too. Time out.
Things.
We're still not there, are we? We're still, anybody else want to help me out? By the way, I'm not going to tell you the outcome of this until for another minute or two. Go ahead.
I don't know if I can help you out, but I think we're missing something here.
Okay.
The scenario you set up is.
This is, by the way, a real scenario.
Yeah, I know, it's
Yeah.
a real scenario, but I think the thing we're missing is, we're coming from the aspect of educators that are concerned about a student. But the thing we're missing is that the teacher that got that letter on that given day may not have been in a position to give the kind of input this particular student's needing.
2 sentences and tell me what you're going through. Just tell me.
As the teacher?
Yeah, as a teacher, just, you're enrolled on this.
You know, Jim, I'd really like to help you with this, but there's some things that I'm trying to work through right now, and I don't think I'm the person that can help you, but if you honestly think things are okay, please, if you have a problem with that, come back and talk to me.
You had me there just for
And
a
I
minute.
lost you.
Yeah, you had me there just for a minute, and I was trying to hold on to this thing. Go.
Jim, I know how you feel. I've had similar feelings like that myself. I have family at home, and sometimes they're demanding too, and I have to take one son to a basketball practice, and I have to be the other side of town for ballet lessons, and what are we gonna have for dinner? And sometimes I just feel like I wanna scream, and I don't know what direction to go.
You really sometimes feel that way?
Absolutely, I do. I really feel that way. So I can understand where you would feel pressures coming from different areas.
What kind of pressures are you going through?
Well, I'm going to school, I'm taking working on my master's degree, I'm teaching, I'm up at 5:30 in the morning, I've got there's 30 children. I want to make sure that my house is clean, there's a
Could
lot
you
of.
go down a little deeper for me? I'm searching for that. You see, it was very difficult, by the way, for years in my life, for me to talk about the fact that I wanted to take my own life. I was so consumed by how everybody else saw me. In my life, love was based on performance. And in my family, the more I performed, the more love I got. So for me to step out of that, what was essentially that feeling of tremendous insecurity, to share with all of you some of my pain, what that does is it gives permission for someone else to then get at their level. So you were the closest of anybody in the room. You were still though on the surface, still things. I mean, here's a kid that is dealing with the deepest pain in their lives. And, when you say, I understand your feelings, and then you proceed to describe your busy schedule and the demands at home and everything, you're still here. This kid is down at the bottom. So, someone else, just give me a little bit more in role play.
No, I have a question.
Shoot.
When she is doing that to you, being down at the bottom, is she not dumping on you? Is that not, that's just, to me, that
Could
was
you
another unloading onto you.
Explain to me, what do you mean by dumping?
Well, in the paper, you had stated, let's say, that everybody relies on me and uses me and things like this, and here someone else is telling you their problems, and you had stated throughout that, no, I usually listen to other people's problems, and here someone else is telling you more problems.
That's an excellent point. But in this particular instance, at least best perception on my part, and I've talked to probably, I would say, several thousand kids in this particular situation at all hours of the day or night, by the way, that what happens is that you have to build up the trust. See, most kids come to you guys with minimal trust. I mean, they've got, most of us in this room have struggled with trust issues. But kids who have been let down so often come at you with a minimal amount of trust. And so, in order for them to trust you more, you have to let them see that you are real. That was the hope I was hoping from, that I was trying to get every one of you to look at. When they sense that you're real, then it gives them an opportunity, and we'll go through this a little bit later on a more active basis with a young person. But when they see that, and then they instinctively feel like, like you're there, you're among them. I'm sorry now.
Yeah, well, the rest of that would be that, yeah, no, it left my mind. I'm so
You wanna
involved.
hold on to it? A little deeper, just you and I, all right? Just you're going through a divorce,
No, I wasn't.
okay.
Well, I'm trying to relate the fact that I understand how he's pushed and he's pulled in different ways.
understands how you are feeling.
No.
No.
We don't, and we give lip service to this. I was at a funeral the other day, and everybody filed past the spouse and said, I know how you're feeling, and I looked at this and I gave her a hug. I gave her a hug. Because I didn't know how she was feeling. She could be feeling angry, she could be feeling relief, she could be feeling frustrated, she could be feeling a sense of aloneness. There's 1,001 different feelings. And every one of us in this room, someone had said that there is never an original thought, but that every one of us has feelings that we bring to the table that are unique. Because there isn't one of us in this room that has the same exact parallel history of life. So when you say to somebody, I know how you're feeling, it almost is an affront. And it's not meant to be that way. It's meant to be caring and loving, and it is a loving statement, but in reality, for most of us, through our filters, we say, they don't understand how we're feeling. But when you allow this boy, for instance, to get in, to see that you're real. And if you say to this boy, Johnny, or Jim, I'm having a tough time today. I'd like to be able to give you the feelings that I have, but I'm having some really struggles at home, and I'm having a tough time. And, I'm trying to keep myself together. And I really care about you, and I want to give you what I can give you, and I just want you to know from my heart that I'm doing the very best that I can at this moment. Well, you want to know what he thinks? I can't perceive this, but I'm going to give you my best shot. His feeling is, I got problems, this person's got problems. I can see a little bit of my own issues through this person, and I'm not so isolated. That's what kids are facing today, is that sense of aloneness. That sense of aloneness. I just came back from a national speaking tour in Australia. This benign country that all of us, 10 years ago, there was a little mecca out there that, people were running to get a better way of life, now has 70% divorce rate. They have the third highest teen suicide problem in the entire world. They are kids. You've been reading lately about the guy out in Pontiac that wants to put the bungee jump in the bar to build up business. Well, they have bungee jumping as a way of life there. Now the kids have taken a whole new twist to this, and they are doing what they call midnight bungee jumping. The dive of death, they call it, without the bungee. That means in the middle of the night they go out, and there was probably a half a dozen deaths while I was there from this experience. It is kind of the ultimate, in their eyes, of of the ultimate decision to end their lives. And so it is characteristic all across the world, this shift in education. And all of you in the room, and people challenge me on this every place that I speak, all of you in the room are facing this. School is becoming surrogate family. And teachers and educators are becoming surrogate parents. When I ask the question in my program, and I invite some of you to come to my programs, I'm doing some local programs next week. I'll be at Gabriel Richard in Ann Arbor and at Lasser High School out in Bloomfield. When I speak to the whole student body, one of the questions that I ask is, how many kids are coming from divorced families? I have to tell you, in all the years, and more than 1 million kids later, I have never been in a school that has less than 50%. When I do California schools, and I do them quite frequently, I just did 11 programs in California in September, I will ask that same question, and you will get 90 and 95%. I just did a school in Thousand Oaks. There was 2,000 kids in the room. I have to tell you, I've never heard a more collective gasp when these kids raised their hands. I mean, there was a sea of hands. So you know that there's a breakdown in the family. and you know that basically there is no good divorce, at least for kids. As amiable as the spouses may be to each other, the kids themselves feel that breakdown of the support base in their lives. So they are in turn moving to all of you in this room. And you are saying to these kids and to the rest of the world, you are saying, I can't do it. I got problems at home. I got to worry about my own children, my own issues, keeping my own family together. How am I going to survive? And now you're asking me to take on another role. And I'm saying to you, it's here. It's here. About 2 years ago, I started a center for the prevention of youth at risk. It's on 60 acres of property in Novi. It's sponsored collectively by the Optimist Clubs and 4-H. And it's designed to train educators and parents in how to spot the red flag signs of the at-risk kid. And then what do you do after you spot them? This, by the way, came out of a personal tragedy that happened in my life. A friend of mine sent her 11-year-old son up to his room to clean up his room, and he put a plastic bag over his head and killed himself. She's been institutionalized in Northville ever since. As I was driving away from her house, I realized how many thousands of educators and parents I have spoken to in the last 7 years. And how many people have said to me categorically, as a man said to me in Pasadena 2 weeks ago in an in-service, I don't feel adequate. What do I do, Jim? And so I got these two enormous organizations to marriage and partner in this center in the hope that there will be some people out there whose children may not have to take the final step. You see, there is two major differences from the time all of us in this room were growing up to where kids are experiencing now, to what kids are experiencing now. And people always tell me, well, it's no different. You know, we had the same pressures, the same problems. We had drugs, we had sex, we had all this stuff. The reality is that there's two things that are happening today that never happened before. There is the tremendous increase, as I mentioned, in divorce and the breakdown of the family. And the second thing is that suicide is becoming a way of life for these kids. I can't tell you how many kids come up, give me a hug, cry, and whisper in my ear and say to me, I don't want to live anymore. My boyfriend just broke up with me. When I was willing to take my own life, it was an exception. Now it is a part of life. I spoke at Sturgis High School probably a year and a half ago, and a group of the most talented athletes in the school, 5 of them, decided collectively that they were going to get together and have a suicide pact and kill themselves all at one time. And they admitted this in front of the whole school. They had gotten in their car several months before, decided that they were all friends and that they all wanted to more or less go out in the same way. They decided that they were going to drive their car as fast as they could and shoot a ravine, thereby effectively eliminating themselves. As they were driving this car down, one kid screamed out, I don't want to die. And whoever the driver was slammed on the brakes and they stopped maybe a couple hundred feet from the edge of the ravine. Now, that could have had another tragic end, as you've heard around the country. But the reality of it is, it's happening. It's happening. Took a young boy in. I do a lot of alternative school work now because it's a commitment of mine around the at-risk kid. But I took a young boy in, who was living in his car, he was 18 years old, lived with me for a year. This kid has seen it all. Seen it all. He had, he's fathered a 4-year-old daughter already. there was a group of people at the table and they were all introducing themselves, group of kids, and they got to him, and he, for whatever reason, decided to take another creative bent in the way of introducing himself. And he said to the man in the first row, he said, "Sir," he said, "could you tell me, what does the front cover of this book say?"
Listening with love.
He said to this man, he said, "You're a liar." And everybody in the room gasped. Well, I brought this kid. I thought, this is, repercussions that come back at me. He says, "This is what I see." And he turned the back cover of the book, and it was completely different. And he said to everyone in the room, he said, "Until you adults can really see what it is that us kids see, you'll never make a difference in our lives." And he was right. He was right. Most of us, we've moved on, and we become, a lot of us have become detached from our most painful times in our lives. But I would venture to say there isn't a person in this room that, if asked individually, could not share the most painful moment in their lives when they were in school and draw back to it as if it happened 10 minutes ago. That's how much it is stuck in our minds. So imagine these kids. They're experiencing the same things. This young boy whose statement I just read, that night went home and hung himself. The teacher said to everyone in the school tearfully, she said, "I will never, ever look at a kid in the same way again." She has to live with that. It was not her fault. She did the best that she could and deserves no condemnation for it except what she will do in her own life. But I have to tell you, the finality of a kid taking their lives is very, very profound on everyone around them. And it lasts. Those of you in this room that have children, there is nothing quite like it that I have seen in families when a young person takes their lives. It's shattering. And one thing, either extreme happens. Either the family bonds together and gets closer, or else they start to do condemning work. They start to point, they start to say, "It's your fault. If you had said something that day, why didn't you say something?" The other person comes back and says, "I tried to, why didn't you do it?" And after a while, it's destructive. It's destructive. But the person is gone. The person is gone. We are giving kids gifts that they don't want and need today as adults. We are giving kids gifts that they don't want and need. Did any of you in this room, did you ever get a gift from somebody that you loved? And they were so proud to give you this gift. They handed it to you. And it was all beautifully wrapped. And it was sitting a couple feet away from you. And they gave you this gift. They put it into your lap. And you were sitting there. And they were sitting there beaming. And they said, "Come on, open it up." And you kind of tugged a little bit at the ribbon. And they said, "Oh, come on, jump into it." And you just pulled off the ribbon, opened up the box, looked at the gift, and said, "Wow, this is something I always wanted." In the back of your mind, you were saying to yourself, "What time do the stores open up tomorrow so I can get this sucker back?" We do that. We do that. And unfortunately, we're misreading each other. We're misreading each other. Sometimes the priorities get in conflict. I played a lot of sports. I had a number of college scholarships. And I used to run, there was a football, when I played football, there was a big sign on the gym wall that says, "Power and prestige are real short-lived." I used to run underneath that sign, and I used to say, that was absurd. Power and prestige are where it's at. family's teaching that. People around me are expecting that of me. That's where it's at. And then, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, when I started to teach this stuff, and it's interesting, there isn't a speaker alive that will ever stand in front of you that if they are not gut level honest, they are going to tell you that they are teaching the stuff that they need to learn. And I am no exception. Every time I speak to a group, it is, for me, stuff that I am wishing and hoping I can keep building into my life. Anyway, I used to see this sign, and I used to think, wow, ridiculous. And then I tried to share this with audiences, and I realized that we were being pulled. Everyone is being pulled. In our hearts, all of us know that that statement is true. But the reality of what is out there pulls us in this tremendous tug of war. So I'd like to do something for all of you in the room, and I am willing, and I have yet to lose this bet, but I'm willing for any of you in this room to buy you dinner at a place of your choice. Okay? I will give you my credit card. You can go to any place, the Lark restaurant if you want. Dinner at a place of your choice. If any of you in this room can name me the last 5 presidents of General Motors. Anyone? Is there anyone that can name me the last 5 presidents of General Motors? Credit card is still intact. These men would, by the way, would be appalled that you didn't know who they were. They worked 18-hour days. They denied their family for weeks at a time. They slept at the top of the General Motors building so that they could get down to their office at 5 o'clock in the morning so that they could continue on the corporate ladder to be the most highly visible corporate individual in the country. And we don't even know who they are. It is short-lived. It is short-lived. One of the things, how many in this room, raise your hand, you're familiar with the song Cats in the Cradle? I am urging every parent, at least once a year, to listen to that song. I believe in my heart that there is no truer exchange in parenting than what occurs in that song. For those of you in the room that are not familiar with this song, it is more or less a dialogue in music by Harry Chapin of a father and son. And originally, in the beginning of the song, the father doesn't have time for the son. And is busy working, is busy with his own life. And the son is asking. And as the song moves through, towards the end of the song, all of a sudden the father is getting old and now wants to have the sense of family and reaches out for the son, and the son says, my kids are sick. I don't have the time now, but maybe we'll do it later. And the last words of the father were, and he turned out just like me. He turned out just like me. Many of us in this room, if not all of us, we inherit all of the problems, the dysfunction, the pluses from our families. And whether we like it or not, they're there. They're there. My father's a neatnik freak. He used to drive me nuts all my life. I am not exaggerating. This past Wednesday afternoon, I was making my bed. And I did hospital corners. And I was moved to call my father in the middle of the day, who's now almost 80 years old, and tell him and say, Dad, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do this. Raise your hand in the room if you have a best friend. Now raise your hand individually, any of you. Tell me, what makes that person a best friend to you? Anyone? Yes?
I can share anything with that person. I just, even though we are
Anybody else? What makes that person a best friend? Yes.
I can tell them my darkest secrets.
Tell me your darkest secrets. Anybody else? What makes that person a best friend? Yes.
My best friend is my sister. And she knows everything about me. And she still loves me.
Great. Anybody else? What makes that person a best friend? Yes.
She listens.
Listens. One more. Anybody else? What makes the person? Yeah, except me for who I am. Except you for who you are. Why didn't any of you who just spoke, why didn't any of you mention the job that person held? House they lived in, money that they did or didn't have? Anybody?
It's not important.
That's
Not
right.
important. Not important. And yet, in our hearts, we know that. But something pulls us in a different direction. I would have given anything. I had a major turn happen in my life probably 4.5 years ago. I would have given anything for someone to have walked into a room where I was and to raise my hand for my best friend that I would have given anything to say was my father. Anything. But you see, I grew up in a macho family. Ever since I was 7 or 8 years old, I was always shut down in terms of sharing my feelings. I was always told it was weak, it was wrong, it was unmanly to share my feelings. And so consequently, I never once told my mother or my father or my brother, never once that I loved them. And as I said, I would have given anything to have been able to do that. As I said, there was a turn about 4.5 years ago. I was speaking at a school, somebody pulled me off to the side and said, Jim, you got some major problems at home, you better take care of them. Turned out my father had had a series of heart attacks. I can tell all of you in the room, I don't remember finishing the program. But I do remember getting on the first plane, getting to New York City where he was, and walking into a hospital room, and for the first time in my life, seeing my father vulnerable. And there he was, tubes sticking out, intravenous bottles coming out, and my first instinct was to walk over and I grabbed his hands. I grabbed his hands. And I wanted at that moment to tell this guy I loved him. I wanted to tell him he was special. I wanted to tell him he had made a difference in my life. But I couldn't do it. The same tapes that kept coming back in my head. It's not safe. You're going to be put down. You're going to be rejected. Started spinning again. I sat there for 2 days, day and night, watching my father move in and out of a coma, sometimes for a minute or two, sometimes a little bit longer. And each time there was another opportunity to tell him that I loved him, and each time the same stuff kept playing back and forth. 2 days, day and night, sitting there watching him, and I still couldn't do it. My father survived the heart attacks. There were 3 in succession. Most of us in the family were not really quite clear about how that was. About a month later, I got essentially a second chance to tell him that I loved him. He had just gotten out of the hospital, and I had a speaking engagement in New York City, and I called him up, and I said, Dad, let's get together for dinner, you and I. It's something I need to tell you. Well, he gave me the perfect out. He said, Jim, I got dinner plans. He said, what about lunch? I had a program to do. I had television commitments. I had meetings. I had a whole day planned. And I was flying in that morning and leaving that night. And I was just going to take a little bit of time, maybe half an hour, just to swing by and stop and see. I rearranged my entire schedule to get at that restaurant a half an hour early to tell him for the first time that I loved him. And I sat in that restaurant doing mind games. What words were going to make him not put me down? What words were going to make him not hurt me? What words were going to make him not laugh at me? What words were going to make him not be silent, which was his most effective tool and which shut me down quicker than anything else. And I sat in that restaurant, and finally I got into a panic. I couldn't sit there any longer, and I got up and I started walking around the block, just trying to get my courage up. I looked over at one of the buildings, and I realized I was 15 minutes late. I raced back in that restaurant, and my father, who runs his whole life by the clock, was sitting there. And the first thing he did was jam me. He put his finger in my face, and he said, why are you 15 minutes late. He says, you know I've only got an hour for lunch. He says, when are you going to be on time? I looked at this guy and I said, no way. No way. I cannot be hurt anymore. No way. Except I looked at my father. He had lost 50 pounds since the heart attacks. His face had virtually no color, and I knew there was no third chance on this. There was no third chance on this one. And I grabbed his hands again, and I said, Dad, thanks for waiting up till 2 o'clock in the morning when I didn't show up all night. Thanks for standing by me when I tore the cartilage in my knee and I couldn't finish the last 3 football games and a ton of guys came down on my back. Thanks for bailing me out, Dad. I really love you. And as I said, I really love you, I put my head down. I didn't even want to know what his reaction was. I was too scared. And I lifted my head up, and it was the last possible reaction in the world I could have imagined. For the first time in my life, I never saw it at my grandfather's funeral. For the first time in my life, I watched my father cry. And all the stuff that was sitting inside of me, I just let go. Just let go. And I reached over and I held him. I held him. I didn't want to let him go. I could tell all of you in this room, especially the men, without any embarrassment for me personally, this ranks at the top of the best moments I've ever had in my life. Ever had in my life. I got together with my father the next morning for breakfast, and he told me something that just blew me away. He said, Jim, I would have gone to my grave and not been able to tell you I loved you because my grandfather told him that it was wrong. He just passed that one on to me. Just passed that one on to me. Most of us in this room are living with that pass on. It affects our personal lives, in our relationships. It affects most important as well. It affects the life of the kids that we interact with. These kids don't trust, and here we learn not to trust too. So they sense we're not there. We're not there. I want to give you a tool. I started doing this with my family because I thought I needed to start it at the beginning. The people who were the most important in my life. But I learned that I could pretty much, it was a universal tool to be able to build trust issues, especially in kids. I call it the 30-second counseling session for the want of a better term. If you see a kid who looks like they're down, you go up to that kid and you say, hey, John, what's going on? If at that moment John says to you, Mr. Collins, I'm having a tough time at home. Nothing seems to be working. My family is not together, and my dad is coming down on me all the time. And you say to that kid, I want you to know that my door's always open. Now, kids have heard this 1,000 times, and they've heard it from 1,000 different sources, and they still don't believe it. The difference between this and the actual bridge of trust is what you do afterwards. You store what that kid just said to you. And if at that moment the kid maybe does not willing to walk into your door and open up and give you let it all out, what you do is you find that kid. 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks later, you find that kid and you walk up to them and you say to them, hey, John, whatever happened with the problem in your family? Whatever happened? Did you work that out? Whatever happened with your dad? Anything happening there? Tell me, anyone in the room, what do you think this young boy thinks after that? Someone.
This person really cares, and I know I can go to him.
Thank this anonymous world, and I grew up in New York City, the most anonymous place in the entire, of any place. I've been over 100 countries. That's the most anonymous place I've ever been. This boy actually says someone in their busy world cares about me. Now, the interesting thing of this is that it's a technique you can use with anyone in your life. But you can use it with the kids you interact with. And you want to know something? Once that trust is built up, your job actually, in reality, becomes easier. It becomes easier. Because the kid that's fighting back and forth with you, that is looking for something out in the world that they cannot find in the safety of your life, now all of a sudden can take the shift. They could take the shift. What was the common word that seemed to be prevalent when I asked the question about best friends? There was one word I heard 2 or 3 times. I used it in the initial part of this talk. What was the common word? Anyone?
Trust.
Close. Close. Huh? Close. Safe. Safe. How many of us in this room want to feel safe? Well, we found the vehicle, many of us. We find it in our families. We find it, in our friends. We find it in our work. We find it in our religious experience. We find it wherever we find it. We have a sense of safety. Well, most kids don't feel safe. They don't feel safe. We're giving kids things that they don't want and need. I brought a young person here today. I can't tell you what admiration I have for Mignon. I've been the keynote speaker at the U. O'Brien Youth Leadership Conference now for the last probably 12 or 13 years. I've been every site. And for many of you in the room, it's high school sophomores. They 300, 400, 500 schools come together and send one representative, and it's an intense weekend dealing with kids' issues. And I met Mignon there probably maybe 10 or 11 years ago. And she probably more than any other kid of the million kids has touched my life in such a profound way. She has her own struggles, her own issues, but she articulates more of what kids are asking for today than almost anybody else I know. Almost anyone else I know. I'm very proud of her, and I'm proud to introduce her this morning to all of you. Mignon Jackson.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Feels like you need a stretch or something. Get you down or up. I'm Mignon. Jim has, I don't know, he says that I made a tremendous effect on his life. He's made a tremendous effect on my life. Because all my life I've searched, just like every other young person searches, just like you may have searched, and that's for security. He talked about safety. Being able to be accepted just for who you are, just for the way you are, with your own issues, with everything that you have, just accepting me. That's, we deal with that in our society, we deal with it in our lives, because everyone wants to be accepted. But the amazing thing is that we deal so much on rejection. We want to, I want you to accept me, but it's difficult for me to accept you. We build barriers, we put up we put up walls that should not be there. And teenagers, young people like myself, want to tear down those walls. You want to tear down the barriers that are there and build bridges. We've got to learn to build doors and create hallways of communication through our talking and the way we relate to one another. The people, when I sit down and think about the people that made a difference in my life, they were not the people that made a lot of money. They were not the people that talked a lot or even gave a lot, but it were the people that cared a lot. If it's three things I wanted in life from my parents, it was love, respect, and time. And those are the three things that young people want. Your love, your respect, and time. That's all. I think about growing up and how my parents would always, instead of, if they made a mistake or if they'd done something wrong or I was punished for the wrong thing or I didn't do it, instead of my mom or my dad coming to me and honestly saying, listen, I made a mistake. It wasn't you, it was your sister. You didn't do what your sister did or your brother did. You know, or it was my fault. They would go out and they'd buy a bike. Or they'd go out and they'd buy a coat. They'd go out and get a jacket. It was always, this gift is for you. But it was never ever the admittance that I'm wrong. That I made a mistake. It's my fault. Young people have got to know that administrators, educators, teachers, and most important, their parents, the adults in their lives, make mistakes. You have faults. It's okay. Because in our lives, when we look at you, you see, it's almost like on a pedestal. It's difficult for us to reach or relate to you because you constantly outline my faults. And in my life, my parents constantly said, Mignon, you can't wash the dishes right. Mignon, you can't sweep the floor right. Mignon, you can't do this. Oh, you're too large, or you're too small, you're too tall, there's always something wrong with me. Always. And I looked at my mom, I said, Mom, you're heavy. You know, look, the rest of my sisters are heavy. You know, my aunts are heavy, and you constantly put me down for my weight, but everybody around me is just like I am. And many of the issues that we deal with, we look at our own lives and we say, I did this when I was a kid and it was wrong. I made that mistake. And instead of honestly admitting to our children that I made, my mom, she got pregnant with me when she was, I think, 21 years old, 22. And she wasn't married, born out of wedlock. And my mom always says to me, I don't want you to date certain guys. I don't want you to be certain places. And certain people I don't want you to be with. Certain times I don't want you out at night. But she never ever explained to me that she made a mistake in her life. And she doesn't want me to make that same mistake. Instead, she puts me down as if I'm just not good enough to do that. We're just not good enough to be there. And it's unfair. It's very unfair. And you'll find that the young people in your lives run to magic men. They run to the Pied Piper that tends to cater to their needs. They give them an opportunity to express who they are, who allow them to be themselves. Excuse me, in Detroit, you know, where I grew up, I'm sure you're familiar with the high crime rate, you know, teenagers dropping out of high school, a lot of problems they experience and deal with. And the reason a lot of teenagers drop out of high school is not so much the fact that they can't deal with what's going on at home. It's that there's an opportunity somewhere else that's better for them at that time than high school. And a lot of times we think it's just the pressure at home. But see, children are looking for outs. Teenagers are looking for escapes. Even, you know, when you think about suicide, that's the ultimate escape. People want out. When we look at our society that we live in today, people and young people want out. We want out of it. We don't want to deal with it. You don't want to face it. It's much easier to walk away than to deal with it. And when you find magic men, it's a magic man concept, and I don't know if Jim touched on it or not. But the thing about it is that the magic man is that Pied Piper. It's the person who gives you what you want. You don't even have to ask for it. It's when you're down. You think no one cares about you, no one is there for you. That person shows up. That person gives you what you want. And it's not always candy, it's not always money. A lot of times it's their time. They say the things you want to hear. The fact that you're important to them. You mean a lot to them. They take you places and spend time with you that your parents don't necessarily have. They give you the respect that you want. They don't say, hey kid, get over there and sit down. Or hey kid, shut up. They're like, hey, you know, you're Mignon. You know, who do you want me to call you? You want me to call you man? You want me to call you? What's your favorite nickname? They deal with that. And everything is what you want. How can I relate to you? And many times in the classroom, teachers feel they have to maintain some level of control, some level of power. I've got to keep these kids in line. If I can't keep them in line, they're going to rule the classroom. I understand that. I understand it's important. My mom's a teacher. And she'll tell you, in Detroit, the worst thing you can do is is that the students rule your classroom. The worst thing you can do is say, hey kids, field day, have fun. They will tear you up, that classroom up, and everything around it. But at the same time, my mom has learned that you have to develop a relationship with the children, the students. And that's one where you can say, I can come from behind my desk. I'm not afraid to deal with you. I'm not afraid to let my guard down. And I can talk to you about my problems. I have issues too. And you can feel secure exchanging issues rather than always throwing it. Many people want to just throw things at us as young people. We get everything shoved down our throat. And we just want an exchange. We just want you to take some time out every now and then and say, hey, what do you think about this? I was telling my mom, I said, Mom, I would do chores better if you sat us down and said, hey, kids, this is what has to be done. The dishes have got to be washed, clothes have got to be washed, things have got to be done. Now, who wants to do what? It's much easier for me to say, well, I think I want to do this. I think I want to do that, rather than you tell me, you're going to wash the dishes, and you're going to sweep the floor, and you're going to run the back. It's much easier when I'm given the opportunity, rather than just shoved down my throat, what to do. Love, respect, and time. A lot of issues I do with my life, I just need some time alone sometimes. Kids just sometimes, parents will say, what's wrong with you? You're looking ugly today. You're not smiling. What happened at school? Who attacked you? And instantly there's got to be something wrong. But sometimes we just need time alone. Time just to sort things out. My mom comes home and she says, get these kids out. Take the kids outside. Everybody get away from me because I need time to calm down. I need time to relax. And I understand that. You need time to unwind. But, students need that same time too. We just want those three things. That love, that respect, and that time. And that's what makes the difference. That's where the security comes in. And that's what building bridges to places of walls. Thank you.
Could you explain to them, because there's a concept that I've used around the country, and Mignon was really instrumental in developing this concept, and it was the concept of the magic man. Could you explain to them, when she deals in the context of the magic man, it is always the individual or collective individuals in a young person's life that give them the carrot that they are looking for. And it could be the boy who says to the girl, look, I won't get you pregnant, I really love you. Or the street pusher who says to the kid, look, the first one's on me, if you really like it, come back and there's a lot more. It's these types of individuals that we in this room are fighting against. And we are, in effect, in many cases, and this is the shift in education, we are in many cases losing this battle. We are losing this battle. And the reality, as Mignon says, is that this Pied Piper who is out there holding this opportunity up for this kid is now gaining more and more ground on those of us who care about the kids from a healthy, positive way. And it is frightening out there. It is not just the inner city schools. I got a call, and I told this man I would use it this morning. I got a call from a man in California who asked me to come out there and speak to a group of educators and parents. He says now in California, almost every suburban affluent community has a teen gang. And these teen gangs now are doing drive-by shootings. And there's a tremendous amount of fear in how to deal with, because before, and I used to do work at Northern High School, and Southwestern High School, and Western High School. And I used to work a lot with the street gang stuff. And it's no longer just isolated to little pocket areas in this country. What kids are saying to all of us in this room is, we don't feel safe with you, we feel safe with this collective group. Now this collective group may be unhealthy, maybe for every one of us, not an option for our own children, but it is happening. And that is the shift. And the way to combat that, for every one of you in this room, is building the trust with these kids. If you came into this profession with the full intent of making a commitment and making a difference, and if the byproduct of this is that you get your summers off, you get, there's some perks to it, look at how you can make a difference. Raise your own level of awareness. There are 5 at-risk situations facing kids today: teen suicide, teen pregnancy, dropout rate, teen violence, and drug abuse. Every one of these 5 has their common thread in low self-worth in a kid. They are simply the symptoms of what is happening in a kid's life. They are not the causal effect. And when we start to look and work from prevention at the causal level, then we can take education into the 21st century with a little bit more awareness, a little bit more understanding, a lot more opportunity. Before we take a break, I want to share something with you. I'm particularly proud of this, but it came out of a lot of pain in my life. I had just come back from Australia. It was the middle of the night. I was sitting on a plane. I was reflecting on the month that I had spent speaking there, and this benign country that I thought was such a paradise now is in shambles. And in addition to the fact that kids are walking around, with the thought in their mind of taking the ultimate dive of death that we talked about earlier, they are also now walking around with a chain, a long chain that goes around their neck, and there's a can on the chain. And these kids are smelling and sniffing. Years ago, what we did was glue. Now it's gasoline, and they're sniffing this. This tremendous outbreak, obviously, of cancer. Kids, so potentials of this are, phenomenal. But it's a wave, it's a sweeping wave. And I sat down and wrote this letter. And when I came back, I got the names of 173, there's 173 countries in this world, and I decided what I was going to do was to write a letter to the world's leaders. In the middle of the night, on a plane coming back from Sydney, I started to write this. And I sent it out, never knowing whether anyone would even listen. But in truth, needing to say it. Needing from my heart to say it. I mean, I was a kid in pain. And kids in pain are difficult to teach. My name is Jim Tuman, and I have spoken to more than 1 million children worldwide. I am not a politician or a business. I am just a highly concerned individual who has seen pain in children, and children in pain are hard to teach. I want to meet with you to discuss this. 1 out of every 10 children will attempt suicide. 16,000 of them succeeded in the United States this year. This is not a problem limited to children in the United States. Every country in the world is perceiving more and more serious problems of self-esteem among their young people. Problems that reflect in drugs, alcohol, suicide, crime, and terrorism. Our children do not want to be part of our world. Whatever you do as a leader of your country can be negated by the next generation if these children are not taught to believe enough in themselves to keep their countries alive and productive. The only solution to this escalating problem is the education of our children within their schools, to deal with their feelings, share their concerns, value themselves, and get help for their problems. During this school year, I will speak to over 150,000 school children in the United States teaching them to recognize their value so that they can lead productive adult lives. In the course of my talk, students stand and tell of their pain and problems. They also learn to express their positive feelings about themselves. Out of the revealing of their real feelings, incredibly shocking statistics have shown up. Sometimes as many as 3/4 of the children admit to considering suicide and drugs as possible solutions to their feelings of loneliness and despair. I am concerned and ready to commit my time and energy to turn these frightening statistics around. I am willing to travel across the world for 15 minutes of your time to show you what you can do in your country so that we can enter the year 2000 with healthy children inside and outside. Please give me an opportunity. I know that you personally know some child who is in desperate trouble. You can turn away from this letter, but you cannot turn away from the problem. Please let me know when I may come to speak with you or someone in your administration. Please accept this accompanying tape as my gift. It reflects the hope of what is possible. To date, I have received 7 invitations from various world leaders to give me 15 minutes of their time. Next summer, I will make what is essentially an around-the-world trip. Now, this came out of my pain. Never thought about this before, but it came out of my pain of seeing what was happening. And all of you are seeing it firsthand. And we can turn away from this. We can look beyond it. We can say it doesn't concern me. I have a sharing component part of my talk that came out of an experience I had when I was 10 years old in New York. I lived in this apartment building with 1,000 families, as I said, the most anonymous city in the world. There was a woman every day I used to help her up with her groceries. She was probably in her 70s. She lived no further away from me than right across the hall, maybe 20 feet. There were several months when I didn't see her. I found out that she died and that they didn't find her body until her rent was 2 months overdue. And I thought in my heart how tragic it is to be that alone in your life that no one connects with you unless your rent is overdue. And I made up my mind that whatever I could do at the level for these kids was at least not to have them feel alone. And that is the difference, the marginal difference between all of you in this room, between taking a kid and turning them in a healthy way to losing them completely. And it is basically just sensing, just seeing, and just allowing yourself to be real. Allowing yourself to be real. Let's take a little break. Thanks for your patience in this first part. One of the things that I am committed to in my life, I belong to a 12-step program called Codependence Anonymous. I grew up in the type of family, as I expressed to all of you, that was shut down in terms of sharing feelings. And it is really tough to try to get healthy carrying all this stuff around with me. And the only way that I've ever known how to be able to do that was that I used to act it out in extremes. Suicide was an extreme. What I've learned now to do is to mirror with other people. And when I say mirror with other people, it is basically to see myself in other people. So when I talked about this experience with this young boy, and we were able to process to the point where if we were real, this boy could see himself in us and could feel it a little bit for us, is the same principle that I have taken now to attempting to get my own self healthy. So I sit in these 12-step sessions and I listen to other people's issues and I see myself in other people. I am a true advocate for all of you in this room to be a member of a support group of some kind in your life. If I could give you anything tangible today to walk away with, it is that none of us in this room can truthfully go it by ourselves. But we spend a lot of energy, as I have done in my life, keeping people at a distance. Don't get too close. You are going to find out something about me and hurt me. And so I kept myself away. But I created this almost isolation that nearly cost me my life. I'm no longer willing to do that. And so I belong to 2 support groups in my life, and no matter where I am in the country, either I do it by phone or I do it in person, but I have committed to know, I'm aware enough to know that there are some weeks that I feel strong and I can give support, and there are other weeks that I just cannot continue and I need somebody to help support me. And the open admission and the surrender of saying that today I don't feel good enough, that I need the support, is so powerful. Most of us in our lives are not truthful about our feelings because we have spent so much time with a history of people that have not honored our feelings that we have shut ourselves down effectively. I have to ask those of you in this room, I'd like individual responses. I want to create a hypothetical situation. For some of you in this room, and I don't know backgrounds or what you're dealing with now in your personal lives, for some of you in this room, this may have closer than just role play credibility. You go into your doctor's office. You go for a routine physical. 3 days later, the doctor calls you up and tells you that you have leukemia less than 6 months to live. Can I ask any of you in this room, what would you do with the 6 months that you have? In terms of personal relationships. Only in terms of personal relationships. Not that it would be, you'd want to travel to Bangkok and see the Dalai Lama. Just personal relationships. Okay? Anyone, what would you do in terms of personal relationships? Yes?
I would try to get the closest to people that mean the most to me.
How would you do that?
Spend time with them, be open with them, talk to them about probably the problems in their lives and the problems in my life.
Okay. Now I have a question to ask you. And this is real. How do you know you don't only have 6 months to live?
How do I know I only have 6 months?
How do you know you don't only have 6 months to live?
You don't. You could die tomorrow.
Well, I don't. I don't.
Hold on. Anyone else? What would you do in the 6 months in personal relationships? Anybody else? Personal relationships. What would you do in the 6 months? Yes.
I guess from a different frame now because I picked up on what you just said, but to me it would be real important that those people, did I care about and love? No. Did I truly love and care about them? And that if in fact in 6 months I die, I want them to remember the good things we've shared and to understand that maybe wherever I end up is not necessarily going to be a bad place for me. And to accept it with the joy of there's not going to be any pain, there's not going to be any true sorrow on my part, but that I care about them and I want them to care as much for me and to know that they should go on and live their life to the fullest also.
Okay. So you do it by, again, interacting with those people in your life. Okay? So I ask you the same question. How do you know you don't only have 6 months?
I start interacting with the people I care about now because I could die tomorrow and I want them to know I care, that they played as much of an important part on my life as I hope I have played on theirs.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is there some degree of false portrayals of a relationship when you know that you have 6 months to live or whatever? Because these
I will give for myself, and then I will allow them the courtesy of answering that question as well. We perceive a lot of time. I mean, you know, I did a film for PBS that I'm very proud of, where I went into a hospice and I talked to kids who were terminally ill. And I asked 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, I asked them, what's important now that you measure your life in days and hours as opposed to the time when you had months and years? And there was always the shift in their minds that relationships were the most important thing. You know, not the cars, not the image, not the rest of the stuff, that. And unfortunately, it takes, in our lives, which is sad to me, it takes a tragedy, an accident, an illness, something profound in our lives to take us, to shake us enough to say, this is what is important now for us. See, I call it closure. What they're expressing about feelings, I call it closure. I call it healing. I have a question for all of you in the room. Raise your hand if you have, in the last 10 years of your life, lost someone that you wish you could bring back for 5 minutes to tell them some of the things that you wanted to say when they were alive, that you've lost someone who's either passed away or moved away that you wish you could bring back for 5 minutes. Raise your hand in your life if you've either lost somebody who has passed away or moved away that you wish you could bring back. Okay? There's a healing that we all need. My sadness and a lot of the stuff that I believe in and teach is that now is the only moment. The sense of carpe diem. Now is the only moment that we own. And I try and instill that in kids because I believe in my heart that what happens is it's a process, and we all pick up a brick from a hurt or from an injustice or from somebody who violated us or whatever it is. We pick up this brick, we keep pulling it up on the wall, and we never ever get healed. There was a man, just phenomenal story. I was at the 12-step program one night, and I was sitting at a table with a guy, and it got to his turn, and he said, I was CEO of 3 major corporations. I've had the cars, the boats. He says, I've had 2 wives and 5 or 6 children. He says, I've been a cocaine addict, I've been an alcoholic. He says, and I can trace all of this pain and dysfunction back to a woman who, when I was 18 years old, put a wall around my heart. And he says, it wasn't until 6 months ago, from the time that he was speaking, on a soccer field in Florida, that he was able to make peace. Now, look at how many lives this man systematically along the way destroyed. Because he never got back to the source. He never got back to the source. And this affects every part of our lives. For those of you in the room who are interacting with kids every day, you bring this to these kids. If you are not growing to a point of your healthiness, you bring it to these kids. I want you to do an exercise with me. Probably of today's experience, something that I do this now on New Year's Eve at midnight every year. It's an exercise, a gift I want to give to you guys because it's been very powerful for me in my life. I want you to write the year of your birth on a piece of paper. Some of you tied it. Actually, this is a great year for me. I got to share this with you guys. This is on Tuesday. It's my 50th birthday party, and I'm going water skiing in a tuxedo, and I'm doing all the craziness. But I'm having parties in 5 states. Okay, and I'm networking out with people in my life. They're giving me parties in 5 states. I'm networking out with people in my life that I love, and that that I know. Some of them I may never see the rest of my life, but this experience. I never wanted anyone to come to my funeral, but I really wanted people to that I could celebrate. So it's been fun. I've already had one in Arizona, and I've got 4 more to go, and I'm looking forward to it. It's just there's a crazy part of me that I haven't shared with you guys that's real unusual, and it's want you, the year of your birth on a piece of paper. Now, for the men in the room, I want you to add 73 years to that year of birth. And for the women, 77 years to that year of birth. And I want you to pick an imaginary day in that year. You can pick your birthday, you can pick any day in that year. Pick, March 15th, plus that amount of time. But I need an actual day. Okay? Men 73 years, women 77 years. And then put a date to it. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, by average insurance statistics, this is the last day of your life. Okay? I don't want to gut it out, but it's my theory for all of you in this room that if, when we are born, if we are gifted with the knowledge of the last day of our lives, our entire life cycle would change. Everything about, things that we felt would burden us, on a day-to-day basis would somehow not have the same, level of significance. Okay? So now that you have this date, underneath this date, in one sentence, as specific as you possibly can make it, I would like you to write how you want to be remembered. How do you want to be remembered by your friends, your family, your colleagues? In one sentence. Okay. Now, which is probably the tougher of the questions I will ask you, because it's the gift to see ourselves as others see us. I would like you to write in a sentence below that how you perceive that people see you now. How do your friends, family, and colleagues see you now? Sometimes I get crazy ideas, and I always thought that wouldn't it be wonderful if we could somehow simulate, and this is not in a morbid way, if we could more or less, sit in one place, or just and have people come up to us as if we had already passed away and say a few of the things that we say to people, when they're lying in the casket. But say them honestly, you did this in my life, you did that in my life. And if we could learn about this beforehand, maybe we could make the alterations. Maybe it's some way we can make the alterations. I was doing a school, Beale City High School, and a teacher that had been there 28 years was a shop teacher who really loved kids. He was talking at the parent program in the evening, and 2 or 3 of the kids got up and were honest enough with this man at that moment, because it was a safe place, to say to him, "Kurt, your sarcasm has hurt us over the years." And this man was appalled. He had used teasing and joking and sarcasm as a way of relating to these kids in a fun way, never realizing what he was doing and the insensitivity of how his words had affected these kids. I have to tell you that I've gotten several letters and phone calls from him, and he has now put his ear to the ground and listened, and he asked the kids, and he asked, "What do you want me of me? How would you like me to be?" How often do we ask that of the people in our lives we love? So this sentence is very critical. On the third sentence, I would like you to write, looking at the first two sentences, if they are close, then this will be much easier. I would like you to write what it is that you could do to totally bridge the gap between the first and second sentences. What tangible thing could you totally do to bridge the gap between the first and second sentences? And underneath that, I would like you to write, you can use first names, last names, I would like you to write 3 persons in your life that you need to heal with. Heal. Heal, Rick. I want you now to take a couple of minutes, 5 probably at the most, and just pick a strategy around how you are going to heal these relationships. If the person has passed away, leave that person and I will explain to you a process of how to be able to also heal that. But if the individuals are still alive, I want you to take a couple minutes and write down a strategy. I cannot tell you the importance of this process and exercise. You will not believe in your heart, if you are able to do some of these things, what a freeing experience it will be for you to move on. Could somebody possibly tell me why you would think a process like this would have any relevance or importance in talking about change of education in the next century, which was the actual title of this program? I wasn't aware that it was actually titled that. Why would you think something like what we are doing now would have any change, would have any significance?
It gives you an idea of how you relate to the people that you are with every day. Not necessarily family members, but everyone. And you kind of evaluate yourself.
Great. Anyone else? Yes.
I think it's at the very heart of the change that has to come in education, because what you teach what you are, and a lot of us come to teaching with a lot of our own baggage. And so,
Thank you. I was waiting to hear somebody say that. Yeah. Yeah. Please continue. I didn't mean to.
well, that was my hope then, that we have to be healed in ourselves if we're going to teach children what it's like to be healed and free. And if we cannot bring kids to that freedom unless we're there ourselves.
Would you, all of you in the room, raise your hands if you have children? Silently to yourselves, ask me, would you want your children to have the continued chain of all the pain and problems that you inherited from your families? Both good and, obviously the good, but some of the negative experiences that you had as children, would you want to hand them down to your children? By the same token, many of you touch the lives of hundreds of kids. Would you want some of the dysfunction that you inherited be passed on to them as well? I have to tell you, I love this work. I love what I do. If I didn't do this, I would dream I would be doing it. See, I didn't want to work somewhere along the line, if I cared enough and I was committed enough that maybe, maybe a couple, at least some kids would make a turn in their lives. And I believe that for all of you. You see, I believe that every one of you in this room can take a kid and turn them. And when I say turn them, sometimes it's just making them turn a little bit to face something. Maybe just believing in them. Maybe just something that, just a little small thing that we consider insignificant, that a kid comes back to you years later and says, "This is what you said to me." You forget what you said, but you knew that it came from your heartfelt place. And so a lot of times when you give up on education, and God, the system out there just destroys, it takes away from creativity and opportunities to really, fully integrate with these kids. But there's still a chance. There's still a chance. And I spend a lot of time what I call swimming upstream. I'm just trying to get educators to see kids as real and not just test scores or grades or pieces of paper, but as real people with real issues. And I went on a national speaking tour of Japan and China a couple of years ago, and I have to tell you, first of all, Japan, for all the technology, for all of the fact that this society has evolved to this point, and that they have this type of, the world in a commercial vein, I have to tell you, I wouldn't be in those families for anything in the world, because the pressure, significant pressure on these kids is so phenomenal. They lead the world 7-1 in teen suicide ratio. The next closest country in the world is this country in teen suicide ratio, and Japan is 7-1. They're just missing the boat. They're missing the boat. We're people. When you walk into a store and somebody violates you, it hurts you personally. When you have a kid in a classroom where you interact with them and you violate them, it hurts them personally. Because many of us, sometimes we just take our baggage and we keep moving it on. Keep moving it on. It's taken every bit of energy in my life in the last few years just to start to peel away the layers, just to get into the parts of my life that were so painful, to face them, to look at them, and to figure out that I didn't want to hand them down to somebody else. I'm hoping if you guys walk out of here with nothing else today, look at the last day of your life. Look at it with a realistic bent and say, and put it up on a bulletin board, put it up on your mirror in your bathroom, put that last day, and as it comes closer and as you're moving closer, take the risks. Take the risks, because we don't know. We don't know. It's not promised to anyone. There are no guarantees. We don't know. And so now is all we own. Now is all we own. There's a man that I asked to come today who has done a number of speaking with me. As a matter of fact, we just did a program over at the educational center of building I went to accidentally. I'm trying to find this. But we did a program for all of the people in Macomb County dealing with the at-risk kid. We did it about 4 weeks ago. And his life is virtually at risk. And one of the reasons that I asked him to come and be a part of this program is because he has lived out more baggage than any of us in this room will ever know. And he's reached that point through his own peeling back the layers and now reaching out and asking for support and trying to move forward. It's been an inspiration to those of us in the world that really know him. And he's got just tons of friends that he really care about. So I want to introduce Butch.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Jim said, my name is Butch Templin. The most pronounced statement I can say about myself is that I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. You may say, what does that have to do with anything that we're talking about today? It doesn't have anything to do with the drugs or the alcohol started at a very young age. I was probably just out of the crib. And I have to relate all that back to poor self-esteem. That is the core of my drug addiction and my alcoholism. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I've been running all my life, trying to fill that void, that empty feeling inside of me. And as Jim said, I've stumbled over a number of different things trying to fill that void, trying to find my spot in life. Where do I belong? Where do I fit in? You know, talking about teachers today, I moved probably 8 different times by the time I was in high school. And that comes from coming from a dysfunctional family. A mother trying to raise 7 kids where I still felt alone, and even though there were 7 of us running around. After moving 8 times, I've dealt with a lot of different teachers. And to stand up here today, do I remember any of them? There's only one name that stands out. And some of you may even know this teacher because she's from the Roseville School District. Her name is Miss Reinhardt. I had her for a speech teacher in the 2nd grade. She taught me that unconditional love that we've been talking about today. She never criticized or condemned me in any manner. She used to bring me inside the school when I'd come to school in a shirt when I should have had a jacket on, but I didn't own a jacket at the time. She would feed me when I didn't have money for lunch money. She paid that special attention to me. She showed me that I was somebody. And during the 2 years that I had her, that void was filled. She always encouraged me to keep going on. She gave me so much love that's been inside of me, and I've been trying to express it for so many years. When I was in the 2nd grade, I didn't want to go home because of all the things that were going on in our family. I've never brought friends over to my home. I never really had any friends to speak of. I would play sports with a few kids, but to have a friend, I didn't have a friend. And I wouldn't dare to bring them over to my home because of the things that were going on in their home. But I wanted what she had. And after school one day, I snuck in the back seat of her car. And I was going to go home with her. I got into her car and I hid down in the back seat. And as we were pulling up in the driveway, I jumped up and said, "Hey, hi!" She turned around and said, "What are you doing here?" She didn't criticize or condemn me for being in her car. She took me in her home. She fed me. She talked to me about my family. Explained to me why I had to go back home and I couldn't live with her. And I cried. And I'll never forget that day. You know, as I said, I kept moving from school to school, and I lost track of her. And as I lost track of her, I lost track of what she gave me. See, this stuff needs to be repeated time and time again. We need to keep reinforcing this stuff. That's why Jim talked about the support groups. We need to know that we need to help each other. These principles that we learned here, they got to be repeated time and time again. As I moved on to these different schools, I lost track of who I was. All the criticizing, all the condemning. My father stifled my creativity at a very young age. He was always calling me a dummy. He always slapped me on the back of my head. And it wasn't that I was dummy, but I was real creative, and I used to take things apart, and I would take things apart that I couldn't put back together. And every time I would get my father to ask me to help me put this back together, I was pulling him from what he was doing. You see, he didn't have time for me. So the first thing he did, he criticized me for taking it apart and slapped me on the back of my head. Well, eventually, I just quit doing things. And I would sit in the corner. And I was scared to ask for help, because every time I asked for help at home, I got slapped up the side of the head. That's what I continued to do in school. I sat in the back of the classroom. And I wouldn't ask for help, and I wouldn't make friends. I was very withdrawing. I'm not sure where it really started turning around, but I found that I could get some attention by being negative. And negative attention was better than no attention. And it worked for me. never feeling belonged, it continued. And that hole in my gut got bigger and bigger again. That was one starting to close up. I went in, got thrown out of high school because of my drinking. The principal was bothering me, tried to take a bottle of booze away from me and another gentleman. And we didn't like that, so we had words. And the only way I could come back to school was if I got my parents to come back to the school board. I never even told my parents about it. I think it was probably a month or so that I was out of school before I told my mother that I'm joining the Marine Corps. She said, what about school? I said, I don't go to school anymore. I was thrown out of school. So I went in the Marine Corps. I didn't belong in the Marine Corps either. You talk about the Pied Piper? I found it in the Marine Corps. I found something that worked better than the alcohol. I found the drugs. And the drugs made me feel good again. It wasn't that it was closing that hole that was inside of me, but it kept me in denial of feeling. From there, I ended up doing a lot of time in the penitentiary. I got approximately 6 years in the penitentiary. By going in and out of there, I father of 3 kids, which become very dysfunctional. I've done the same thing to my kids that my father did to me. You know, where does it all stop? Who's going to take the part and be responsible? You know, the parents are blaming the teachers in the schools, saying that the teachers aren't teaching the kids the things they need to know to become productive adults. The teachers are saying this has to come from home. I'm here to teach the kids to read and write and do math. When does it become our responsibility? Whose responsibility is it? I believe it's all of our responsibility. We talked about it. If we reach out and touch one person, we did our part. I'm also involved in support groups. I go to AA and NA. And I'm taking it a step further because that's what the 12th step tells us to do. We carry the message. My message is that I have poor self-esteem. I come from a dysfunctional family. I don't just keep that around that 12-step group. That's why I'm here speaking to you people today. To let you know that there's help out there if someone needs it. I encourage you to start your own support groups. You don't have to be dysfunctional to have a support group. Besides those other support groups, we have what we call a mastermind group, where a few of us meet there and we talk about things that we want in the future. And we encourage each other, and when we build that bond that we talked about. I throw down a challenge to all of you people today to reach out and help someone. When you see that kid sitting in that corner, take that extra minute for him and find out what's going on with him. And when you see him the next day, like Jim talked about, ask him again, are you okay today? Probably the best way I could sum it all up is a story that I heard just the other day. And it's a story that means a lot to me. It's about an old man walking on the beach. And he would walk the beach every time the tide would go out. And when the tide would come in, it would wash in all these starfishes. And there'd be hundreds of starfishes on the beach, and this old guy would walk around and pick up these starfishes and throw them back out into the ocean. And there would be hundreds of them laying all around. He was being observed one day by a whole group of teachers that were on tour. They were all standing on the pier. They said, look at this old guy picking up these starfishes and throwing them out there. That don't make much sense. So one of the teachers decided to go talk to the old man. And when he walked up to the old man, he said, sir, why are you throwing these starfishes out in the ocean? The old man turned and looked at him and said, these starfishes have a right to live. The teacher looked back at him and said, yeah, but there's hundreds of them laying out. You can't possibly throw all these starfishes back in. The old man turned and picked up a starfish, grabbed the starfish and flung it out back into the ocean. He said, no, I can't make a difference for all of them, but I did for that one, didn't I? I encourage all of you to go out there and pick up a starfish. can make the difference in someone's life. Thank you.
How often have we said a negative thing to somebody? How often do we wish that we could take back some comment that we made to a kid? How often do we wish that maybe had we counted to 10 and kept our cool that we could have not hurt another person? I want to give all of you a challenge. I'm trying to give you enough substantive exercises so that you will go back into your lives and then you will grow and stretch, and then you will become healthier, which in turn, by example, which is the best way to teach, that you will in turn be able to help other people. I'm going to ask all of you for a 24-hour challenge. Okay? My number is on the back of a tape that you will get. I want you to call my number or my address and drop me a note. I want you in your families to spend and get everybody together in the family and collectively agree to go 24 hours without a negative comment or put down of each other in the entire family. Okay? Now, the kicker to this is that if you go 23 hours and 59 minutes, you have to start all over again. Okay? You've got to go a full 24-hour cycle with your entire family, where no one, no sarcasm, no put-downs, no innuendos, no jokes, no nothing in terms of harming another individual. Okay? I'd like in the room to see by a show of hands those people that think in their families that this is possible to do. 24 hours without a negative put-down. Anyone? Huh? There is no doubt in my mind. There is no doubt in my mind that those of you that just raised your hands, that you live by yourselves. How it's a way of life. It's a way of life. And what we are teaching by example is this continuation of this way of life. So by some sort of, for the kids and for your family, if you do nothing else for your family, but if you take the 24-hour block and maybe you make it once, and you get everybody together and you say, how did it feel? And then everybody says, you can tell there's a little bit of a difference. So you try it maybe for another 24 hours. You try it in small little blocks. And after a while, you start to realize, because the absence of all of this stuff makes it even more pronounced. So when you're not hearing the negativity, or you're not hearing the put-downs, or you're not hearing all the stuff, then all of a sudden, you realize how much that played in your life. How much you see it on the tube, how much you read in the paper, how much all the stuff that you see, all of a sudden, this thing that just has been buzzing in our heads almost subliminally, that this has become a way of life for people to relate to one another. And then we wonder why things exist for the kids. We wonder why. You know what I tell parents? Most of you in the room are already aware of this, but there's some of you in the room that may not be. You know what I would tell parents? I said, if you ever want to see the dynamic of a school, go into a lunchroom. Go into a lunchroom. You will see the entire school laid out in front of you in terms of kids, issues. You'll see the kids that are by themselves and they're trying to fit in. You'll see the totally lone kids. You'll see the kids that are in the power groups. You'll see the kids that wannabes. You'll see all the stuff that goes on in a lunchroom unfolded. It is probably the greatest learning experience for a parent to actually see where their kid fits in. but even more so for all of you in the room, just occasionally, just spend a minute or two and just look out at the lunchroom. Just take in that sense of awareness. Stop, racing from the classroom to the teacher's lounge to get your lunch, and just stop for maybe a minute and look out, and you'll see a lot of the kids in your classroom, you'll see where they fit. You'll see where they fit in this hierarchy of a school. And then you'll know a little bit more how to relate to them. Because you see, the one thing about a lunchroom is it's unstructured. For a kid who's alone, who falls through the cracks, they can pretty much exist in a school setting on a structured basis and just take their space. But the lunchroom gives you, that's the time the kid dreads. Sitting there by himself having lunch. I want to give you some creative suggestions that I have discovered around the country in terms of building self-aware dishes for kids. There was a wonderful principal who just retired from Breckenridge High School, who has done something monumentally in his school in the last 5 years. And he represents what education should be in my mind. He asks every teacher to write something positive about a kid and hand it to him in the form of in any kind of form. And then he has somebody on staff assigned to transpose this into a letter that goes home to the parents. Okay? Now this is nothing new or revolutionary, because there are schools around the country that do the same thing. But Al takes it one step further, which is wonderful for me. Once the letter is actually formulated, he invites the kid in to his office. And he reads that letter to the kid and tells the kid he's going to send it home. Anyone in the room, what do you think happens? What do you think happens? I bet, what do you think happens? That kid has 3 or 4 or 5 days to feel great about himself, knowing in his heart that something's coming home that's going to praise him. So he's gotten the benefit of the letter. He's gotten the benefit of the 5 days. So you have just extended this kid's feeling of worth. There's a teacher in Colorado, also a parent of 5 children. And this is something that all of you can do as parents, and you can relate this to parents as well. On one occasion, his middle son came home and had improved in probably 4 subjects and had gotten a D in 1 subject. And this boy sheepishly did not want to tell him, did not want to hand him the report card. And he realized, he saw in his son's face the pain that this one failing grade was going to be the focus of the next hour and a half discussion with him. But the father did something monumental. He didn't mention the grade. He just, as he looked down the report card, he said, geez, you really improved in this? You really did this? This is wonderful. Never, ever, ever mention the grade. The D. And the boy went nuts for days, was waiting. It's like kind of a time clock, waiting for this to happen. Father never, ever mentioned the D. What do you think happened in the next report card? Huh? No more D. D. We program negativity. That's why I said when you do the 24-hour challenge, we program negativity.